From what I initially saw of Diluvian, it was hard to see what specific kind of game it'd be. I knew it'd be a retro-styled FPS, but at the same time, that's a pretty big subgenre, and it's not one size fits all. Having recently played a decent number of boomer shooters, it's a surprise when one features an intro cutscene. The vibe it gave off was similar to space operas, and I liked that a lot. It made it so that I was expecting more than just running gun gore like in other retro-styled FPS games I've played. That eventually led to seeing Diluvian's intricate art design, which I loved. Having recently played games that greatly contrast with what Diluvian had to offer in the visual department, it's easy to see that a lot of time went into that aspect. It's more than just looking at pretty colors. When I started playing, I thought the level design was pretty tight, and by tight, I mean that there were a lot of corridors. That was a bit of a turnoff, and it left me thinking that the rest of the game would be by the book, but it wasn't. It eventually changed, and I was surprised by that. Diluvian featured one level in particular that had a lot of verticality and tunnel-like designs. At first, it made things confusing and at times hard, but ultimately, I liked that. I was forced outside of my comfort zone, and as a result of that, Diluvian stood out to me in another way. Though Diluvian featured parts that made it stand out from other boomer shooters, it still leaned onto what the genre is known for. The use of keys in order to advance wasn't a surprise, but it was still different. I thought it was a little weird that some levels required backtracking in an unexpected way. What I mean is that I could get past locked doors and passages as if they weren't there. It was only once I reached a certain point in a level that I needed to tackle that earlier challenge. Ultimately, it made things more interesting, but while in the middle of having to take care of that, it was a little confusing. It's because I found it difficult to go back to areas I knew I'd previously gone through. It wasn't impossible to find my way back, but at the same time, it also could have been handled better. With games like Diluvian, you tend to expect a variety of weapons. I'd say that in most games you expect weapons of some kind, but what's important is when and how to make them available. You could also say that the weapon's usefulness / firepower should also be included there, but I don't want to go off on a tangent. I was pleasantly surprised to see that a lot of weapons were available fast. Seeing as how the sword comes off as a big deal, I expected this to be a melee-based FPS game, but I was wrong. Within a few minutes I'd found the pistol, and around an hour or so into Diluvian I found the rifle. There were more, but these were the ones that most stood out to me. Seeing as how it was easy to switch between weapons in and out of combat, I found myself using each a fair amount of time. I definitely favored the sword, but it wasn't always a good idea to head face first into enemies. Sometimes I was forced to whittle them down from afar, so that's when the mid to long range weapons came into play. I'm sure that deciding whether or not to make your weapons upgradable is something a decent number of devs think about. Initially, I thought that upgrading the weapons was confusing. It's because I saw a lot of different options. What I first saw as a special unlockable that I didn't want, I later realized was the first step in upgrading your weapons. Upgrading them eventually became intuitive. There wasn't anything out of the ordinary there. You could upgrade the damage, fire rate, and a couple of more that I don't recall at this moment. Something else that comes into play when you're dealing with upgrading weapons is how to manage that. In Diluvian, the upgrades were made possible thanks to resources that you collected during and after combat. There were more resources available than I initially thought there'd be, but not to the point where I felt that an imbalance was created. If anything, I liked that I had the option to hang on to my resources because I didn't feel forced into upgrading my weapons. For the time that I played Diluvian, I felt that I was well equipped and capable of making do with what I had on hand. I'd like to be able to say that everything about Diluvian was great, but then I'd be lying. My original plan was to play everything that was available, but I ran into a problem when I wanted to continue from one of my saves. It's shown that I've made progress and I'm able to continue from a level different from the first, but when I load it, I start off from the beginning. I didn't know what was up with that, so I decided to make a first impressions video rather than a review. I could have just restarted and kept going, seeing as how Diluvian is fun and I wouldn't mind doing that, but having to have coverage out within a timely manner came into play. This bug I encountered was frustrating, but it doesn't leave me thinking badly of Diluvian. My overall playtime with Diluvian is 3 hours and I was left with plenty to write about. I know that there have been other games such as this one, but Diluvian still does a good job with what it has to offer. It makes great use of colors and other visual aspects to stand out. While sticking to tried and true guidelines seen in other boomer shooters / retro styled FPS games, Diluvian still manages to do its own thing, and I like that. It's possible that some may feel that the boomer shooter / retro styled FPS subgenre of games is currently played out, but I'd say that it ultimately depends on the game and its quality. It's for sure true that it's possible to milk a genre of games absolutely dry, but as long as the quality and enjoyment is there, I see no problem in more games such as Diluvian being made. How do you feel about melee-based weapons in FPS games? What are your thoughts on verticality and level design? If you enjoyed this content, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, share, and if you're up for it, become a patron. Thank you very much for watching.